Happy belated Australia Day, Patriots and Patriots. Has it already been a week? I hope everybody enjoyed their Australia Day, and I hope the young whippersnappers watching enjoy going back to school. Yeah, school, I know, right? The March for Australia just held its third march on Australia Day last week, which is significant as for the past decade, Patriots have abandoned public celebrations of Australia Day, and we've surrendered the cities to Invasion Day race communists to spew hatred and racism towards white Australians with impunity. The opposition to Australia Day continued to grow, and it looked as though that one day Australian patriotism would be a thing of the past. Thankfully, that did not eventuate, and Australians are finally beginning to show pride in their great nation once again. In this video, I want to recap the first three marches for Australia, how the March for Australia first began, the lead up to each march, the march proper, and the aftermath of each march. Afterward, I will make a series of observations from trends I've seen from the first three marches, and then using my observations to make predictions for the future of March for Australia, and then give some recommendations for the future of March for Australia. So if you've been involved in organising March for Australia in any way, or you are friends with them or talk to them often, please watch and send them this video for the unfiltered and honest analysis of a neutral observer. The idea for a March for Australia first originated in early August on TikTok after those disgusting scenes on the Sydney Harbour Bridge of pro-Palestine protesters burning the Australian flag, after which an anonymous patron on TikTok suggested a march on Australia on the 31st to reclaim our country. This suggestion gained a lot of traction very quickly, and by the 15th they had already organised marching locations. In the lead up to the first march, the media talked about it non-stop, slandering the organisers as neo-Nazis, and it was clear that they were shitting bricks, terrified of a unified right marching against mass migration. It was clear that the simmering anger for mass migration, which had laid dormant for the last 10 years, was ready to boil over in some of the largest demonstrations in Australian history. Nowhere was this more exemplified than when maverick politician Bob Katter threatened to punch a journalist in the mouth at a press conference over a below-the-belt remark about his heritage. Because of this march, for the first time in who knows how long, mass migration became the #1 issue in Australia, despite a supermajority of Australians consistently opposing mass migration beforehand. The first march was easily the best march. The lead-up was electric, the vibe was awesome, everybody in the right wing was there, the left was furious, everybody was talking about us, and we brought the country to a standstill. Stand tall and stand proud, fellow patriots. There had to have been at least, across the entire country, 500,000 patriots who marched side by side. I caught a train that ran from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane, and it was entirely full by the time it reached the greater Brisbane area. It was standing room only for my entire trip. That was so inspiring, even though it was annoying to stand for an entire hour on the train, crowded. Praise came in from across the world, including from Jared Taylor, Nick Fuentes, Asmongold, and even the richest man in the world himself, Elon Musk. The crowd itself was mostly peaceful. Most marches occurred without conflict or arrest. However, there were a number of incidents. Anti-immigration protesters and counter-protesters almost came to blows in most cities. A few people were charged with assaulting a police officer and breaching the peace in Sydney, Brisbane and Perth. Melbourne, on the other hand, was a complete shit show. Constant street violence and punch-ups, while a gang of Antifa thugs violently assaulted innocent nationals, prompting the NSN to storm Camp Sovereignty, the base of the Antifa goons. Predictably, the media and the institutions were not impressed. The media's greatest wet dream came true after neo-Nazis falsely claimed that the march was their brainchild. Not that the truth of that claim mattered to them, because headlining every 6 o'clock bulletin was the alleged neo-Nazi riot bringing this country to a standstill. The scenes of genocidal neo-Nazis speaking and attacking innocent and defenseless Aborigines in Melbourne, while an open mic session allowed these genocidal neo-Nazis to spew their hatred, those disgusting, evil neo-Nazis. The media conveniently left out the fact that in Sydney, the neo-Nazis who spoke at the open mic had no affiliation with the March for Australia. And who could forget Adelaide, which I find this to be fucking hilarious, where the media helped the police waste valuable resources to track down a man who held a placard praising alleged cop killer Desi Freeman. Now, Desi Freeman still hasn't been caught, but the police put more effort into finding him, comparatively more effort into finding him, than actually trying to find Desi Freeman. What was interesting about the first march is that many right-wing activists, many of them ethnic such as Joel Davis and Big Chocky, plus libertarian Topher Field, disavowed the march because it was apparently racist, despite the fact there were Indians there, and Asians there, and Arabs there, and I'm sure there were a handful of Jews there as well. As stated, the march was very successful. So successful that the organisers decided to hold a second march only 7 weeks later. The media didn't report on the lead up to the second march because they realised that their constant pearl clutching in August was partially the cause of such a high turnout. We didn't know what to expect from the second march because it would have been the first time that the left and the right would publicly clash following the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I, for one, expected that after the left celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk, and by extension wanting us all to die, that things could could have got really fucking ugly. The NSN announced that they would not be attending the second march in an official capacity, but would be hosting seminars across the country. This announcement flew right in the face of the media's lies, and later Scott Challen's lies, that the March for Australia was affiliated with the NSN or run by the NSN. Why would the NSN organise a march in August and just abdicate responsibility afterwards? Or why would the NSN organise a march in August, organise yet another march only 7 weeks later, but not run the second march as well? That doesn't make any sense. Not that this nugget of information mattered to the media, who falsely claimed that the Sydney march was affiliated with the NSN, after which I encouraged Beck Freedom to sue the ABC for defamation. The day of the second march arrived, and it was underwhelming. The crowds were quite smaller than the first march because there was a media blackout and there was less pearl clutching about the neo-Nazis because they did not attend. Most marches were peaceful. There were a few arrests, but the police did a very good job at separating us from the counter-protesters. Now disregard everything I just said because Melbourne was a war zone. The police spent the entire march protecting themselves from weapons and projectiles thrown by leftists, presumably at us, but since they could not reach us, the police were the next best target. The police, in a break from their politicisation and weaponisation against nationalists, praised the behaviour of nationalists and were furious with the left. Watch this.
This is what was thrown at police today, and I think Melbourne has had a gutful. I look on the social media streaming platforms of some of these issue-motivated groups that are saying police used excessive force. The fact was, these were being thrown at police. Bottles filled with shards of glass were being thrown at the police. Rotten fruit was being thrown at police. Bins were put on fire. Flags were on fire. And I think, really enough's enough. People came to pick a fight with the police. The people that came to pick the fight with police were the issue-motivated groups on the left. I can tell you that the March for Australia group, they were peaceful, they were engaging, they listened to our instructions, they did what they were told, and they protested by example.
While we can commend the way the police treated us at the second march, we once again cannot commend our treatment by the media. They framed us for the violence in Melbourne, and when we called them out, they once again obfuscated the culpability. After this, there would be no more marches until Australia Day, presumably because a march in November would have been too soon, and a march in December or early January would have been impractical because of Christmas and New Year's. Not that the 100 days between marches was uneventful though. Scott Challen, the man who organised the first two Brisbane marches, as well as the other Brisbane organisers, broke away from the March for Australia for seemingly no reason under the guise that Beck Freedom, the main organiser for the March for Australia, colluded with the neo-Nazis and allows them to march, but many people, including myself, believe that the real reason he split was either to create a profitable grip for himself or to sabotage the nationalist movement. Another event that would further galvanise nationalists was the Bondi massacre, where 15 people were murdered by two Pakistani Islamic extremists on Bondi Beach in Sydney at a Hanukkah festival over the Israel-Palestine conflict. The importation of millions of people from foreign lands who don't assimilate, show no respect for our laws and customs, and who treat our country as their own personal arena to battle out their ancient blood feuds forced Australia to finally reckon with the fact that people from certain countries should not be allowed into Australia. Following this, nationalists were further angered by the lack of action on the part of the government, who not only didn't even bother to appease us by cutting immigration even slightly, but drafted and passed draconian hate speech and gun control legislation, hypothetically making it an offence to call for immigration restriction. For a more in-depth overview of the laws, I made a video a couple of weeks ago about the proposed hate speech laws, which are now passed, unfortunately. I recommend that you do watch it if you would like to catch up. After 100 days and a number of nation-changing events, the day finally arrived where nationalists would march on Australia Day for the first time in a very long time, celebrating the National Day with pride and jubilation. This in opposition to the miserable Invasion Day protesters across town burning the flag and calling for the abolition of Australia, all while reaping the benefits this great nation bestows. Numbers were unfortunately once again down because of another media blackout on the third march. Prior to the march, I made a series of predictions about what I thought would go down on the Australia Day marches. We're completely outnumbered by Invasion Day protesters in all capital cities. I'd say I was mostly correct. In Melbourne, official numbers report that up to 17,000 people marched with the Invasion Day protest, while only 2,000 people marched in the Australia Day protest across town. Up north in Sydney, 18,000 Invasion Day protesters rallied, but across town there were only 2,000 Australia Day protesters. The Queensland rallies will be a complete joke. I was partially right. Because there was a split in March for Australia Queensland, the official march was held on the Gold Coast while the OG organisers held their march in Brisbane, diluting our influence. The extreme heat definitely kept a lot of people away. However, from what I saw, only a few hundred people attended the Gold Coast rally, while in Brisbane the speeches were boring, not inspiring, and the march was not worth standing in 43-degree heat. There will be constant punch-ups between patriots and leftists, and the violence will be pinned on us. There wasn't as much violence as I anticipated, but there were some altercations, including a stabbing that was not covered by the media at at all. The media, however, talked about an alleged bombing attempt in Perth by nationalists which didn't harm anybody and didn't detonate. It wasn't even a proper bomb. So you know that if a nationalist stabbed a counter-protester, that would have been the leading story in every 6 o'clock bulletin across the nation. The media will screw us over. I was right again, they didn't cover the attempted murder committed by a leftist at our rally, and there was also the thwarted firebombing plot involving Molotov cocktails from a Muslim leftist that left the news cycle fairly quickly on the Gold Coast. The police will do a terrible job at protecting us. According to eyewitnesses in Melbourne, the police watched on while nationalists were assaulted by leftists despite appeals from nationalists for intervention, which were unheard. The neo-Nazis and cookers will make us look like idiots. Well, I walked out of the Brisbane rally because the stupidity got unbearable. It was just cooker after cooker coming up to speak. I wonder how the politically unacquainted felt. And even though he shouldn't have been arrested, and I'm not counter-signalling, but what the majority of the public saw was a neo-Nazi screaming about the Jews and hailing Thomas Sowell and Joel Davis, which was broadcast across the nation, it did not paint us in a good light. I'm not counter-signalling. I'm not condemning what he said. I'm not condoning what he said. I'm just stating what I believe the majority of the public thought. Last week was the third March for Australia, and the third March is a significant event because after the third of something, you can then more accurately analyse trends and with those trends make predictions for the future. I think that I, as a neutral observer who attended all 3 marches as a marcher alongside the rest of the general public, but is also mutuals with some of the organisers across the country, am able to accurately analyse the trends of these marches and predict the long-term trajectory of the March for Australia and where it is headed in the future. Afterward, I will make a series of recommendations for the March for Australia, which I highly recommend all the march organisers watch and strongly consider. My first observation is the attendance numbers have been going down at every subsequent march. I don't know why the numbers keep going down, maybe because people just wanted to celebrate the public holiday last week and the second march was too soon after the first. The heat definitely played a factor, so as temperatures begin to cool down, hopefully we can get some more people to our marches. I believe that the media blackout also played a role. As I said, the media's pearl clutching in August is why so many people attended the first march, after which they did not cover the second and third marches. This means that it's up to us to spread the word and bring as much people to future marches as possible. My second observation is that while the number of violent confrontations has been going down, the extremity of the violence has been getting worse. At the first march, there was only basic street violence. There was at least one scuffle at every major march. You know what they say, fiery but mostly peaceful. While in Melbourne, the police were nowhere to be seen while nationalists and counter-protesters kept locking horns. At the second march, it was mostly peaceful. Nationalists did not get assaulted, although the police in Melbourne were confronted with an endless barrage of rocks and projectiles thrown at them by the left. If the rocks were just a little bit sharper and they were thrown the wrong way, somebody could have died or have been permanently injured. Third march, somebody got stabbed in Melbourne. Brazen attempted murder in broad daylight caught on camera. While in Perth, somebody allegedly threw a bomb into the crowd. Where were the police? I'll tell you where they were. They were busy arresting people in Sydney for offensive speech and investigating joggers in Melbourne for calling homosexuals poofters. How bad is the violence going to get from here for the police to finally put their foot down? Does somebody have to die? My third observation is that we are not urgent enough. Australia, within our lifetimes, is projected to become majority-minority. Although you wouldn't know that because Brisbane puts more effort into creating a concert than actually focusing on the message. It's either that or it gets hijacked by one nation so it becomes a platform for a political party to garner attention. I counted 1, maybe 2 or 3 marches in Brisbane that I thought was actually worth my time. The rest was just inane nonsense. I eventually walked out of the march because it just became a platform for general grievances. Lots of the marchers who have been interviewed will say immigration isn't the problem. It's just mass immigration or illegal immigration or colour doesn't matter, ideology matters. No, immigration is the problem and colour absolutely matters. What do we get by cutting immigration only slightly? Just another 5 or 10 years to delay our inevitable replacement? Colour matters because race is real. There are tangible, noticeable, objective, meaningful differences between the different races. And I understand you don't want to be called racist, but they already call you neo-Nazis despite the fact that we aren't neo-Nazis, and they laughed when Charlie Kirk was murdered. You are not going to convince them. My first prediction is that somebody will die at a March for Australia rally. The violence keeps getting worse, the left keeps getting angrier. They actually believe that we are all Nazis and that Nazism is rising in Australia. Eventually, somebody is going to take that to what they believe is the logical endpoint and kill somebody. The left has seen what is going on in the United States. They see ICE going around detaining some illegal immigrants, and they actually believe that ICE is worse than the Gestapo. They believe that ICE is actually going around murdering innocent immigrants and protesters. They are angry, we are angry, and they know they have relative impunity to act violently. Some leftist is going to go too far and kill a protester, most likely in Melbourne. As I said earlier, a leftist did not feel uncomfortable committing attempted murder in broad daylight on video simply because a patriot waved an Australian flag in front of him. As of yet, this man has not been charged with any crime and the mainstream media has put no effort into locating this man's whereabouts. My second prediction is that eventually the March for Australia will just evolve into a riot between nationalists and leftists. Before the left kills us, they will riot. They will cause a scene and they will drag us down to their level. Nationalists are going to get angrier and angrier, and immigration will continue to bring down all areas of life. People who somehow haven't felt the effects of mass migration already will begin to feel its effects this year. Life is gradually going to get worse in 2026 because of immigration, while the government does nothing and allows these people to come in and creates a two-tier justice system for whites and nationalists to receive greater sentences than leftists and browns. Who's to say a black swan event doesn't occur where innocent white children are murdered by a refugee, which prompts a repeat of the Southport riots we saw in July of 2024 in the UK. Melbourne, whenever there is a protest, now resembles Belfast during the Troubles. My first recommendation is to hold the March for Australia every 8-ish weeks. You could hold it more frequently in the winter, but holding it enough where nationalism and immigration restrictionism, ideologies supported by the vast majority of Australians, are frequently in the news cycle, but not frequent enough where the people just get sick and tired of us. My suggestion for the next March would be on the last Sunday before Easter, so we can dominate the news cycle in an otherwise slow news week before everybody goes off for the Easter school holidays. My second recommendation is to make marching routes public beforehand so as to attract leftist counter-protesters. Now, you may be processing what I just said and remembering what I predicted earlier about leftists eventually killing one of us, and you're completely flummoxed by what I said, and I completely understand. However, from my perspective, these people are going to agitate. They will show up at our marches trying to harass us. What better way to combat leftists trying to kill us than having the police knowing of this information as soon as possible so they can adequately prepare for and prevent any physical altercation to the best of their ability. From what I've heard, at the second march in Brisbane, according to this diagram I've created for your perusal, we were here and the counter-protesters were there. The police were not prepared for a confrontation between us, and somebody must have alerted them that the counter-protesters rushed to block us somewhere around here, so the police had to sprint to intercept the leftists before they could block us. The police wouldn't have had to stretch their resources that thin if the leftists were opposite us. Another benefit is that even if this does not guarantee our safety, and this actually has the opposite effect, more violence occurs, then everybody's feed after the march, regardless of whether or not they care about politics, will be of violent left-wing counter-protesters assaulting innocent nationalists, turning people away from their cause. I was talking to some friends over the weekend, none of whom went to the march or paid close attention to the march, yet they were all aware that one of our own got stabbed and somebody else threw a bomb into a crowd. The left is very quickly burning their political capital. We as nationalists have to prepare to greet the masses with open arms. My third recommendation is that you should march on landmarks. Imagine the image of 200,000 patriots marching on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, 75,000 patriots marching on the Story Bridge, 20 to 30,000 patriots marching on Parliament House. Not only would that contain deep national significance, the eyes of the world would be on us. Imagine if President Trump saw that and pushed our government to reduce immigration. When the left marched on the bridge for Palestine, that was the leading story across the country. The lead-up dominated the news for a week beforehand, and people from across the world were inspired by Australians marching against the Gaza genocide, and from that birthed the March for Australia. We could also do a one-off convoy to Canberra, such as what happened in early 2022. Australia also has world-famous beaches we can utilise. At first I was critical of holding the South East Queensland Australia Day March on the Gold Coast. However, looking back, that is a fantastic idea. What is more quintessentially Australian than having a march, then afterward having a sausage sizzle at the beach while having a swim or playing some beach cricket? For Australia Day marches, I propose that every march be held at a beach. For example, Bondi in Sydney, St Kilda in Melbourne, both the Sunny Coast and Gold Coast in Brisbane, etc. My fourth and final recommendation is that you should not abandon locations just because there was a split. From now on, most Queensland marches should be in Brisbane and most South Australian marches should be in Adelaide. There were splits in March for Australia in Queensland and South Australia, and because the traders already took the city, organisers had to find somewhere else to march. No! Make them march somewhere else. The cities are ours. The March for Australia is ours. Not theirs, ours. Don't surrender an inch to these traders. You give an inch, they take a mile. Don't indulge their grift. Anyways, that is the end of the video. I hope you liked my sunglasses, my sunnies. If you agree with my summary, predictions and recommendations, feel free to tell me in the comments. And if there is anything with which you disagree, please tell me in the comments. And if you think there is anything I can improve with my videos, once again, please tell me in the comments. Apologies for not getting this video out sooner. I've got other projects in the pipeline, including a video essay and a debunking video about the latest pro-immigration video that is making the rounds through leftist midwit circles. I'm also going to write long-form essays on Substack, and in due course, I will begin nightly live streams on YouTube, so I highly encourage you all to stick around for them. If you like this video, please give it a like, and if you liked it that much, please subscribe. I've got, as I said, lots of great content coming. You can also follow me on all my social medias, the links to which are in the description. You can, if you would like to further support my work, you can join my Patreon for as little as $5 Australian a month, where you can get shoutouts in my YouTube videos and Substack articles. My dog's barking. Even my dog's excited about my future YouTube videos. I've also got a free Discord you can join, and if you join my Patreon, there are exclusive Discord benefits for you. Thank you all for watching. God bless you all, and goodbye.